The camera flashes exploded like lightning against shattered glass. 3 years ago, Thane Rourke's face was carved open by metal and fire. Blood streamed down his cheek as photographers circled like vultures, their lenses hungry for the perfect shot of Harbor City's fallen tech prince. The warehouse behind him still smoked. 3 of his engineers lay dead inside. Flash. Click. Flash. That photograph, his face half destroyed, eyes wide with shock, became the most viral image of the year. The headlines wrote themselves, "Monster of Tech, the Face of Greed, Billionaire's Bloody Reckoning." But today, they call him a monster. What they didn't know would change everything. The woman who just walked through Aegean Tower's revolving doors, briefcase in hand, chin raised like a queen claiming her throne, is about to rewrite his entire story. While tabloid covers still scream, "Hideous Hermit," Claire Jones strides confidently through that crystal lobby like she owns a place. Have you ever been judged by your appearance before people knew your heart? Maybe you felt the sting of walking into a room where every eye lands on you. Not with curiosity, but with assumptions already carved in stone. Your clothes aren't expensive enough. Your skin doesn't match their expectations. Your scars tell stories they'd rather not hear. Do you know someone brilliant who's been overlooked because of prejudice? Someone whose genius got buried under society's shallow obsession with the right look? Someone who could change the world, if only given the chance to prove their worth beyond a single photograph? Have you watched the media destroy someone's reputation overnight? Seen how a 10-second clip can erase 10 years of good work? How a bad angle can become someone's entire identity? How the internet's hunger for shock turns human beings into punchlines? Or maybe you've been that person, hiding from cameras, avoiding mirrors, wondering if you'll ever be seen for who you really are instead of what trauma left behind on your body. If any of this hits home, you need to hear what happened next. Because sometimes the people the world calls broken are the ones who end up fixing everything. Welcome to Harbor City, where image is religion and gossip is currency. This glittering coastal metropolis runs on a simple rule. If you're not camera ready, you don't exist. Every coffee shop has ring lights. Every conversation gets recorded. Every mistake becomes content for a city that devours scandal like oxygen. For 3 years, Thane Rourke has been Harbor City's favorite ghost story. The billionaire hermit locked in his glass tower, too hideous for public life. Tech blogs called him Howard Hughes with a Harvard MBA. Society pages ran betting pools on whether he'd ever show his face again. The scar runs from his left eyebrow to the corner of his mouth, warping his cheekbone like geography redrawn by disaster. Board meetings happen without him. Charity galas removed his name from guest lists. Dating apps? Forget about it. When you're worth $9 billion, but the internet has decided you're too ugly to love, money becomes just numbers in an account you're too afraid to enjoy. Meanwhile, across town, Claire Jones was building empires the world barely noticed. This brilliant cultural strategist had spent years turning small grants into community revolutions. She spoke 3 languages fluently and sarcasm like a native. Her agency, Kinship, didn't just change narratives. It rewrote the rules entirely. But Claire had her own complicated history with tech billionaires. Empty promises, broken communities, algorithms that turned neighborhoods into data points. So when Harbor City announced a $500 million renewal project requiring Thane to work with a community advocate, Claire's name topped the list for one reason. She was the only person in the city who'd never asked for his money, his attention, or his pity. Their first meeting? Let's just say sparks flew, and not the romantic kind. But what happens when 2 people refuse to play by the city's rules? What happens when the monster everyone fears turns out to be the most honest man in the room? When the woman they expect to tame him decides instead to unleash the truth? What Claire and Thane built together didn't just change Harbor City. It exposed the real villains hiding behind perfect smiles and clean jawlines. The conspiracy that destroyed his face, the system that tried to silence her voice, the beautiful people who profit from other people's pain. By the time their love story shocked the world, Harbor City learned something revolutionary. Sometimes the faces that don't fit on magazine covers are exactly the ones that can change everything. If you've ever felt judged unfairly, hit that like button right now. Also, drop your location and current time in the comments. I want to see where in the world people still care about human decency over superficial beauty. Because the story, it's about to get wild. Claire arrived at Aegisson Tower at exactly 6 a.m. when Harbor City still wore its coat of morning fog, and the glass cathedral stood empty except for security guards and a faint hum of servers keeping the digital world alive. The lobby smelled like polished marble and that particular blend of wealth and ambition that clings to every surface in tech temples. She carried a leather portfolio thick with research and a thermos of coffee that cost $3 instead of $30. Her heels clicked against the floor with the precision of someone who had learned to command rooms before she was old enough to vote. Thane waited for her in the penthouse conference room, his back to the door, staring out at a city that had spent 3 years dissecting his worth. When he turned around, Claire felt her breath catch. Not because of the scar, but because his eyes held the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying other people's ghosts. "Ms. Jones," he said, his voice careful and measured. "Thank you for coming." "I have conditions," Claire replied, setting her portfolio on the table with a sound that echoed through the space. "Full transparency. Every contract, every vendor, every decision gets community oversight. No closed-door meetings, no PR spin, and no heroes, just grown adults doing hard work." Thane nodded slowly. "Agreed. You say that now, but wait until Mrs. Rodriguez from 5th Street tells you exactly what she thinks about your company's role in her neighborhood getting over-policed because of your data." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe respect. "She should tell me. They all should." After she left that first morning, Thane found himself drawn to the sealed room on the 40th floor. His fingers found the keys of the grand piano that no one else knew existed, playing melodies that sounded like rain against windows and promises he'd never kept. The music filled the space between his ribs where guilt had made its home. Ever worked with someone you couldn't figure out? Someone who looked at you like they were solving a puzzle instead of making assumptions? That's exactly what Claire Jones did to Thane Rourke's carefully constructed walls. She didn't flinch at his face. She didn't offer pity. She offered something far more dangerous, the possibility that he might deserve a second chance. 3 weeks later, Thane stood in the basement community center of Riverside Heights, facing 47 residents who had very specific opinions about his company's impact on their lives. The folding chairs creaked under the weight of decades-old frustrations. Fluorescent lights cast everything in harsh, unforgiving brightness. "You killed my nephew," said Mrs. Rodriguez, her voice steady as steel. "Not with your hands, but with your algorithms. That predictive policing pilot your company helped design flagged him as a threat for walking to work at 5 a.m. 16 traffic stops in 3 months. 16. You want to know why he had a heart attack at 24. Thane absorbed each word like physical blows. He could have explained that Aegisson didn't directly build the policing software. He could have mentioned the third-party vendors who bastardized their open-source code. He could have hidden behind lawyers and liability clauses. Instead, he said, "Tell me about him." For the next 2 hours, person after person stood up. They told him about children afraid to play outside because drones circled their code playground, about teenagers stopped and searched for matching algorithmic profiles, about a community that became a testing ground for technology designed by people who would never live with its consequences. Thane listened to every story. He took notes. He asked questions. He never once defended himself. Claire watched in the back of the room, studying this billionaire who absorbed community rage like a lightning rod. She expected deflection, excuses, the standard corporate dance of accepting responsibility while admitting no fault. What she got instead was a man who looked each speaker in the eye and said, "How do I fix this?" When the meeting ended, they walked to the parking lot in silence. The night air tasted like salt and car exhaust, And somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed its way through Harbor City's eternal emergency. "You didn't have to take that," Claire said finally. "Most of what they blamed you for wasn't technically your fault." Thane stopped walking. "My face isn't the problem," he said quietly. "Is it?" Claire turned to look at him fully. The parking lot's yellow streetlight cut harsh shadows across his scar, but she didn't see damage. She saw someone who had spent 3 years learning to carry weight that didn't belong to him. "No," she said, "your face isn't the problem. Your secrecy is." Something passed between them in that moment. Not attraction, not yet, but recognition. Two people who understood that sometimes the only way forward is through the fire that almost killed you. Comment truth if you think honesty is the sexiest quality someone can have, because what happened next proved that courage comes in unexpected packages. Saturday morning found them at the waterfront drum circle, where Harbor City's most forgotten communities gathered to remember rhythms older than the skyscrapers. Claire had dragged Thane here against every instinct he had about public appearances. He stood at the circle's edge like a tourist in his own city, wearing jeans that probably cost more than most people's rent, but trying to blend into the background. Children ran between the drummers. Elders kept time with hands that had seen decades of Harbor City's changes. Teenagers freestyled spoken word over rhythms that made the ground vibrate. "You can't learn rhythm by watching," called out an elder named Marcus, patting the empty space beside him. Thane hesitated. Claire nudged him forward. His first attempts at keeping time sounded like confusion translated into palm strikes. Offbeat, uncertain, the kind of rhythm that made people wince. But then something magical happened. The circle didn't mock him. They adjusted, created space for his learning, let the collective beat carry him until his hands found their own truth. By the end, he was smiling crookedly, the scar pulling his mouth into a crescent moon that transformed his entire face. That's when Claire spotted the telephoto lens glinting from behind the seawall. Harbor City's paparazzi had found them. She moved between Thane and the camera, like a wall made of determination and designer denim. "We decide the story," she murmured, her voice fierce enough to cut glass. The photographer got his shot anyway. But instead of the beast learns to be human narrative he expected, he captured something else entirely. Two people protecting each other, equal partners. A love story that refused to be anyone's entertainment. That night, they both lay awake thinking about hands touching drum skin and the way protection felt like coming home. But Harbor City's media machine was just getting started, and what happened next would force them to choose between the love growing between them and the work that defined them. What would you do? Choose love or protect your life's work? Drop, choose if you'd risk everything for the right person, because there are impossible choices coming, and it's going to change everything. Their impossible choice arrived at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, delivered to the cold glow of smartphone screens across Harbor City. The security footage was grainy, shot from above in the parking garage beneath Claire's apartment building. Timestamp: 11:43 p.m., Sunday night. Two figures pressed against a concrete pillar, lost in each other, completely unaware that every stolen touch was being recorded in high definition. Thane's hand cradling Claire's face, her fingers tracing the edge of his scar. The moment their lips met, soft and desperate and entirely private. Or so they thought. By dawn, the 27-second clip had been shared 40,000 times. Harbor City's gossip machine devoured it like oxygen, spawning headlines that made Claire's stomach turn. Billionaire beast bags beauty. Scarface's charity case romance. Black woman fixes broken white man. Again, the comments were worse. Threads dissecting her motives, her appearance, her worth. Anonymous accounts questioning whether she was being paid, whether this was performance, whether any woman could genuinely desire a man with that face unless money was involved. Claire's phone buzzed nonstop. Kinship's main line rang constantly. Reporters fishing for statements, clients demanding explanations, board members of partner organizations suddenly discovering scheduling conflicts for previously confirmed meetings. At 9 a.m., Her assistant Maya knocked on her office door with the kind of expression people wear to funerals. Riverside Community Trust just pulled their contract. That's the third one this morning. Across town, Aegison's stock price dropped 12% before the market opening bell finished ringing. Trading floors lit up with whispers about the company's stability, about whether a CEO dating his community liaison represented a conflict of interest, about whether Harbor City's most hideous billionaire was finally losing his mind. The emergency board meeting convened in Aegison's chrome conference room at 2 p.m. sharp. 12 faces around a polished table, each one carrying particular tension of people whose money was hemorrhaging in real time. Board member Patricia Winters led the charge, her voice sharp enough to cut crystal. Thane, in 48 hours, you've managed to turn our redemption narrative into a soap opera. Our investors are nervous. Our partners are questioning our judgment. The Harbor Renewal Initiative is solid. Thane replied, his voice steady despite the storm brewing outside the glass walls. Our community engagement metrics are the highest they've ever been. Because you're literally engaging with the community, snapped another board member, in parking garages. After midnight, the room's temperature seemed to drop. Thane's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Patricia continued, you gave the city a love story in our hour of risk. This was supposed to be about corporate responsibility, not your personal rehabilitation through romance. That evening, Claire stood in front of Harbor City's Channel 8 news cameras, refusing every question designed to make her apologize for desire between two consenting adults. I refuse to apologize for love, she said, her voice cutting through the reporter's attempt to frame her as either a gold digger or a saint. I refuse to reduce my professional expertise to a subplot in someone else's redemption arc. And I absolutely refuse to pretend that a man's worth is determined by the smoothness of his skin. But the damage was spreading. Kinship lost 2 more clients by Thursday. Claire's staff, brilliant, dedicated people she'd hired and trained and loved, started avoiding eye contact during meetings. Meanwhile, Claire couldn't sleep. Something about the leaked footage nagged at her, the way an off-key note haunts a musician. The angle was too perfect, the timing too convenient. Someone had been watching them, waiting for exactly this moment. So she did what she did best. She investigated. Friday morning found her in the city planning office, requesting public records for every contractor involved in the Harbor Renewal Initiative. Friday afternoon, she cross-referenced those companies with building permits issued in the past 5 years. By Friday evening, she was following digital breadcrumbs through a maze of shell companies and subsidiary relationships that made her head ache. That's when she found it, buried in the fine print of a maintenance contract for the warehouse that exploded 3 years ago. A clause so vague it essentially meant nobody was responsible for anything. The company that wrote it? Meridian Solutions, LLC. The parent company of Meridian Solutions? Vale Futures Group. Vale, as in Rowan Vale. Saturday morning. Claire knocked on Thane's apartment door, carrying a manila folder thick enough to stop a bullet. When he opened it, she saw something she'd never seen before. Thane Rourke looking genuinely surprised. "We need to talk," she said. His living room was minimalist, except for the baby grand piano that dominated one corner, and the floor-to-ceiling windows that made Harbor City look like a toy set. Claire spread documents across his glass coffee table, like evidence at a crime scene. "The warehouse explosion was an accident," she said without preamble. Thane sat heavily in the chair across from her, his face unreadable. Claire watched him process the contracts, the shell company connections, the maintenance clauses written in deliberately confusing legal language. "I suspected," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I could never prove it." He stood and walked to a desk in the corner, returning with a thick folder of his own. 3 years of dead ends," he said, setting it beside her evidence. "Private investigators, forensic accountants, corporate lawyers. They all came back with the same answer. Tragic accident, no one to blame." Claire opened his folder and saw the obsession laid bare. Hundreds of documents, timelines, Photos, financial records. A man who had spent 3 years and probably millions of dollars trying to prove what everyone told him to accept. She reached across the table and took his hand. I suspected I could never prove it, she repeated softly. But I'm not you, and you're not alone anymore. Her fingers tightened around his. Then we get brave. What neither of them knew was that Rowan Vale had been Harbor City's golden boy long before Thane's face got redesigned by flying metal. Handsome, charming, media-trained Rowan with his perfect jaw and TED Talk smile. The futurist who pivoted from Aegisson to civic tech consulting just months before the explosion. The man whose alibi for that night was giving a keynote speech about ethical innovation to 300 witnesses. The same man who had carefully cultivated relationships with every major media outlet in Harbor City, who had friends in the right security companies, who knew exactly which parking garage cameras could be accessed remotely. Rowan Vale, who had watched in the shadows as his former partner became the city's monster, while positioning himself as its savior. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, this story is for you. Subscribe for the shocking finale, because what Claire and Thane discover next will destroy everything Harbor City thinks it knows about heroes and villains. And the real conspiracy? It goes deeper than either of them imagined. The real conspiracy went deeper than either of them imagined. But they were about to find out exactly how deep at Harbor City's most exclusive event of the year. The Harbor Renewal Initiative Gala arrived like a glittering trap, set in the crystal ballroom of the Meridian Hotel, Rowan Vale's carefully chosen venue. 500 of Harbor City's most influential people gathered under chandeliers that cost more than most people's houses, all wearing masks that cost more than most people's cars. Claire entered wearing a dress the color of half-lights on water, midnight blue silk that caught the light and held it like secrets. She'd chosen specifically because it made her feel powerful, not beautiful, though the effect was undeniably both. Her mask was minimal, barely more than black lace around her eyes, because she refused to hide while demanding transparency from everyone else. Thane wore a tuxedo tailored perfection and a mask that was little more than a thin black line across his brow. The scar remained fully visible, a declaration that he was done hiding from Harbor City's judgment. When he walked into that ballroom, conversation stuttered and died, only to resume in whispers sharp enough to cut glass. "Look at him," murmured a real estate heiress to her plastic surgeon husband. "Still thinks he belongs here." "Look at her," replied another voice. "Still thinks she can save him." The string quartet played arrangements of pop songs about survival, which made the old money nervous and the new money pretend to understand art. Champagne flowed like water, and water cost more than champagne. That's when Rowan Vale made his move. He appeared beside Claire at the champagne fountain like smoke given form, all perfect angles and practiced charm. The kind of handsome that photographers loved and algorithms rewarded. His smile could have powered the ballroom chandeliers. "Claire Jones," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "The woman who tamed the beast." "Rowan Vale," she replied, not turning to look at him. "The man who created one." His laugh was crystal-breaking. "You understand optics better than anyone in this room. You're wasted on redemption arcs. Come build futures instead of fixing the past." Claire finally turned to face him fully. Up close, she could see the calculation behind his perfect features, the way his eyes moved constantly, cataloging reactions, measuring responses, adjusting his performance in real time. "Confess," she said quietly. His smile never wavered. "Confess what exactly?" And that's how she knew with absolute certainty that they were right. Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition that passed faster than lightning but hit just as hard. Rowan's mask of charm slipped for exactly half a second, long enough for Claire to see the man underneath, cold, calculating, dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with scars or public perception. "Enjoy your evening, Miss Jones," he said, already turning away. "It's going to be memorable." An hour later, Thane stood at the podium, abandoning every word his speechwriters had crafted. The ballroom fell silent, 500 faces turned toward him like flowers toward light. Cameras from 7 news outlets focused their lenses. Social media lit up with live commentary. 3 years ago, fire and metal redesigned my face, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the crystal-draped space. I carry those engineers on my skin. David Martinez, Kelly Chun, Roberto Santos. They died because someone decided their safety was worth less than profit margins. The silence grew thicker. Claire felt her heart hammering against her ribs. I let fear dictate too many choices after that night, Thane continued. Fear of cameras, fear of judgment, fear of looking weak. But hiding from truth doesn't make it disappear. It just gives other people permission to rewrite your story. He looked directly at Rowan, who stood near the back of the room, champagne glass frozen halfway to his lips. Tonight that changes. Claire moved to the second podium, carrying a laptop and a confidence that could level buildings. Ladies and gentlemen, we are done with smoke. We are done with mirrors. We are done with pretty lies that let ugly truths flourish in the dark. She opened the laptop with a flourish that made the cameras lean forward. Every contract, every payment, every decision made in this initiative will be public, searchable, and real-time. If we fail you, you'll know exactly whose name belongs to that failure. The screen behind them lit up with a transparency portal, a website so clean and intuitive it looked like the future had arrived early. Live feeds of construction progress. Itemized budgets updated hourly. Community feedback forms with guaranteed public responses. This is what accountability looks like in the 21st century, Claire announced, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made seasoned politicians take notes. The crowd leaned forward. Phones emerged from designer purses and tuxedo pockets. Harbor City's most powerful people suddenly found themselves witnessing something they'd never seen before: voluntary vulnerability from the people asking for their trust. Then, at exactly 9:47 p.m., the portal collapsed. For 12 catastrophic minutes, the website displayed fabricated spreadsheets suggesting that Aegison had laundered money through offshore accounts and Kinship had funneled community funds to shell organizations. The numbers looked real. The documents carried authentic timestamps. The evidence appeared damning and detailed. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Champagne glasses paused mid-sip. Camera operators zoomed in on Thane's face, searching for cracks in his composure. Social media exploded with screenshots and commentary that would be retweeted around the world before midnight. Claire felt the ground shift beneath her feet, watched 3 years of reputation building crumble in real time, saw Harbor City's gossip machine preparing to devour not just her professional credibility, but everything she'd built to lift her community. That's when she remembered who she was. She stepped back to the microphone, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade through silk. If you wanted me humiliated, you should have chosen a different woman. The ballroom fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Electric, dangerous, alive with possibility. What you just witnessed, Claire continued, is exactly what we've been warning you about. The ease with which your truth can be replaced by someone else's lies. The speed with which reputation becomes commodity. She gestured to a team of people entering from the side door, forensic accountants she'd arranged as backup, community witnesses she'd invited as insurance, the teenagers from Riverside Heights who knew more about digital security than most of Harbor City's tech executives. So we're going to do something unprecedented. We're going to investigate this hack in real time, in front of you, with full transparency and independent verification. We're turning this gala into a courtroom, and you're the jury. Have you ever had to defend your truth when everyone doubted you? When the evidence against you looked perfect, but you knew the story behind the story? Comment, warrior, if Claire's response gave you chills. Because what happened next proved that sometimes the best defense is turning your attackers' weapons into your armor. The teenagers from Riverside Heights moved through that crystal ballroom like digital detectives in formal wear, their laptops humming against mahogany tables, while Harbor City's elite watched democracy happen in real time. Maya, 17 years old and wearing her grandmother's vintage dress, Trace a hack through 3 layers of proxy servers while explaining her process to a CNN reporter. See the signature code? It's trying to look random, but whoever wrote this has a habit of using semicolons instead of line breaks. Amateur mistake. Within 40 minutes, the forensic trail led exactly where Claire expected. Straight back to a subsidiary of Vail Futures Group. But then Maya found something else, buried deeper in the server logs. "Ms. Jones," Maya called out, her voice carrying across champagne conversations and camera clicks. "You need to see this." The secondary trace revealed another layer beneath Rowan's digital fingerprints. Someone had been feeding him inside information for 3 years. Someone with access to Aegison's internal systems. Someone who knew exactly when and how to strike. 2 days later, a package arrived at Thane's apartment with no return address. Inside, a charred key fob from the warehouse, a flash drive, and a note written in careful block letters. "Try again." The flash drive contained raw security footage that police had never logged. 23 minutes of crystal clear video showing a figure tamper with gas valves 2 hours before the explosion. The figure wasn't Rowan Vail. It was someone Thane had trusted like a second father. Calder Pierce, his father's old friend and the man who had taught young Thane how to negotiate contracts and never show weakness. Calder Pierce, who had been feeding warehouse maintenance contracts to shell companies for a decade, who had written the deliberately vague safety clauses, who had mentored Thane while slowly poisoning every system he touched. The revelation hit Thane like a physical blow. Not just betrayal, but the realization that the man who taught him to hide his pain had been profiting from other people's deaths for years. Claire didn't let the story get buried in legal proceedings and corporate damage control. Instead, she partnered with the Media Lab teenagers to produce a 37-minute documentary that premiered in Riverside Heights Park on a borrowed projector and a bedsheet screen. Truth in sneakers and hoodies, as one reviewer called it. No dramatic music, no talking head experts, just teenagers explaining complex financial crimes in language their grandparents could understand. Community members sharing how abstract policies became personal tragedies, and footage of Calder Pierce literally running from cameras outside his country club. The documentary went viral in ways that made marketing executives weep with envy, not because it was polished or sensational, but because it was true in a city that had forgotten what truth looked like when it wasn't dressed up for cameras. Harbor City began to change, slowly and then all at once. The transparency portal became the new standard for public-private partnerships. Boston copied it. Seattle improved it. Detroit made it mandatory. Other cities watched Harbor City prove that citizens could handle complex information if you presented it honestly instead of hiding it behind jargon and focus group messaging. Marcus Chun, the investigative reporter who had spent 3 years writing monster headlines about Thane, published a public apology that became required reading in journalism schools. "I chose spectacle over substance, shock over truth. I turned a man's trauma into content and called it news. Try harder, pay the interns, and remember that real people live behind the stories we tell." Romance as resistance became Harbor City's unlikely export. Not the Disney version where love conquers all, but the grown-up version where love meant choosing transparency over comfort, accountability over appearance, partnership over performance. 6 months later, rain fell steadily on the dedication ceremony for the Riverside Heights Community Center, turning the celebration into something more beautiful than any event planner could have designed. The building rose from the corner where the old surveillance pilot had once turned neighbors into data points. Its facade carried a mural painted by local artists. Faces of every age and background, unfiltered and unglossed, reflecting the community as it actually existed rather than as developers preferred to imagine it. Thane stood at the crowd's edge, rain darkening his suit, scar glistening, no longer hiding in the wings of his own life. He watched Claire on the small stage, introducing the real heroes. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had turned grief into advocacy. Marcus from the drum circle, who taught rhythm as resistance. Maya and her fellow teenage filmmakers, who proved that truth-telling was a skill that could be learned and taught. When Claire stepped down from the stage, Harbor City's cameras clicked and social media hummed. But the noise felt different now. Less hungry, more hopeful. The city that had once devoured scandal for breakfast was learning to be astonished by tenderness. They met in the middle of that rain-soaked crowd, not as symbol or spectacle, but as two people who had chosen each other under siege and kept choosing when the siege became something else entirely. This love story shocked everyone, but not for the reasons Harbor City expected. It wasn't beauty taming beast. It was partnership challenging every system that made beast necessary. Claire wasn't a rehabilitation center for a billionaire's guilt. She was a world builder who demanded reciprocity and refused to make someone else's healing her life's work. Thane's scar didn't disappear under love's gaze. It transformed from spectacle to testament, proof that survival could look like anything and still be beautiful. Their romance wasn't costume drama or charity case. It was rebellion dressed in evening wear, transparency disguised as seduction, revolution wrapped in the simple radical act of seeing each other clearly and choosing each other anyway. If this story changed how you see love and power, subscribe and share, because the real revolution starts when we stop accepting the stories they tell us about who deserves love, who gets second chances, and what happily ever after actually looks like in a world brave enough to choose truth over comfort. Sometimes the people the world calls broken are the ones who end up fixing everything. And sometimes love isn't about healing. It's about building something new from the beautiful, complicated pieces of who you really are.